Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at In the Year of the Dragon, which is an ancient Chinese-themed pseudo-worker placement game designed by Stefan Feld. Let's jump right in with the description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, and then I'll finish with some closing remarks. This is In the Year of the Dragon, set up for a 3-player game. To set it up, you give each player 6 money. The gold represents 3 money, and the silvers are 1 apiece. And 2 palaces 2 stories high. You'll see that those are actually 2 separate palaces stacked on top of each other. The marker in their color, and then they put their turn marker on the turn order track, and they're going to stack, and their scoring marker on this track over here. Also, each player takes 11 cards in their color, which is going to form their hand. They're welcome to look at them. And there's reference cards here to help you out throughout the game. You lay out the 12 events. The first 2 events are always these peaceful ones where nothing happens, but then the rest of them are randomized, except no 2 of the same event can happen in a row. So if that happens, you just shift it down. You lay out the 7 action cards. You don't have to shuffle them up yet, but just for demonstrative purposes, there's always going to be the same number of groups as there are players. So we're 3 players, so there's always going to be 3 groups, a 3, a 2, and a 2. Then you lay out the persons. Some persons don't have an older and a younger version, so they just go in the stack here in the center where there's no different layers. But some of them have different abilities, and that's based on age in the game. And you'll see here the younger actually has the higher number but does less things. You only see 1 helmet there as opposed to the older with a lower number and 2 things. We'll understand the significance of those in a second. But for each player less than 5, you remove 2 of each type. So for these, that's going to be 4 total because we have 3 players, so that's 2 per player, so that's 4. But for these, it's going to be 2 of the younger and 2 of the older that get removed. Lastly, you just prepare a pool of money, rice, fireworks, the extra palaces, and the privileges. The game lasts 12 rounds represented by each of these events down here. At the end of the 12th round, the game is over. Each round consists of 4 phases: action, person, event, and scoring. But there is an initial staffing phase, which we're going to go over right now. At the beginning of the game only, in turn order, so from top to bottom, each player takes 2 of the guys from this area and puts them in his palaces. So you can take any 2, but they can't be the same, and you put them in your palaces. You can put them in the same or different, but usually people put them in different. And based on these numbers here, you're going to move that many places along the turn order track. So this guy takes a 6 and a 4, for instance. He would move up 10. And now the next player goes, but there is a restriction that you cannot pick the same 2. You can pick either of them, but not the same 2 group as any player before you. So it's okay to pick the Buddha or the medic, but not both of them together. So the next player would pick and move that many spaces. Now, if he moves the same number of spaces as the guy before him, say he picked these 2 here, he would put his marker on top, because he would get to go first in turn order. And that's exactly how turn order works, and that's why these stronger, older guys give you less in turn order, because they give you more items, which we'll understand in a second. So after everybody takes their 2 people, the actual game starts, and it starts with the action phase. So these action cards are laid out. They're going to be shuffled each round, but they're already shuffled this time real nice for us. In turn order, top to bottom, if you're on the same space, players carry out actions. They take their dragon and they place it on a group of actions, and they do one of the actions in that group. So this would be a group of 3, 2, or 2. And you can do any of those actions in that group. Now, if a later player wants to do one of the actions in the same group, and they place on the same place, they actually have to pay 3 money to take that action. So being first is nice. Instead of taking any action, a player is allowed to refill their money to 3, and that's in lieu of placing your dragon out there. And I don't mean by 3, I mean 2, 3. So if you're at 0, you go up to 3. If you're at 2, you would just gain 1 more, 2, 3. So let's go over each of the actions. Whenever you take an action, you get that many things. So in this case, you would get 2 money if you took this action, but you also get money for each symbol on your guys in your area. So for every tax guy, you would get 3 extra. So if I had 2 tax guys in my region, for instance, I would get 6 plus the 2 on here, 8 money. That's pretty much how all the actions work, and the next one would be build. So for each hammer I have on the card itself and on the guys in my area, I get to build 1 palace. So, and you can build palaces by stacking. The maximum height of a palace is 3, so I can never make a palace of 4, or I can just start new palaces. I could even build 2 more if I wanted to, but that's generally not advisable. Next are the harvest and the fireworks, and they work exactly the same way. You get 1 for picking each of these cards, and then additional based on the guys you have in your area. The military parade is for turn order, so you get to move up 1 space in turn order for the helmet on here, and then 1 additional for each helmet you have in your area. Next is the books or research, and each of those is worth 1 point. So this itself is worth 1 point, plus any number of books you have in your area gains you additional points. And last, but definitely not least, is the privilege. So if a player takes this action, he has the opportunity to buy one privilege, just one. It's either a large privilege or a small privilege. A large privilege costs 6 money, and a small privilege costs 2 money, but they're going to be worth points each turn. After each person has taken their actions or gone back up to 3 money, the person phase begins. And now turn order, which may have changed if somebody picked the one with the helmets, players get to pick one of these guys. And they do that by discarding the corresponding card from their hand. They also have 2 wilds, but once you discard a card, you never get it back, and it's going to be in this public discard pile here. So you play the card, and you would take that type of guy and place him in your area. Now, whatever his value is, you move up that many spaces on the turn order track. He can only be placed in a palace that has enough space for him. Palaces can hold as many people as they are stories high. So each of your first 2 palaces can hold 2 people because they're 2 stories. So if there's room for your guy, he goes in there and everyone's happy. If there's not enough space because it's full of, totally full, so let's say I picked this guy here and I already had my maximum, which is 4 because I have 2 palaces too high. I can either discard him and not use him at all, but if I do that, I don't get to move up in the turn order track, or I discard somebody I already have and place him, and then I do get to move up by his value in the turn order track. So that's important to understand. You probably want to limit that as much as possible, though. Also, you only have 11 cards, so in the 12th round of the game, you're not going to pick a person. And it's important to make sure you know what other people are picking, because if one pile is totally depleted and you play that card, unfortunately, you will lose the opportunity to get a person that turn. So after everybody's picked their person in turn order, the event happens. And the first 2 events are always nothing, so they're real nice and peaceful the first 2 rounds of the game. But after that, different things occur. This one here is the drought, and players have to pay 1 rice per occupied palace they have. If they have an unoccupied palace, they don't have to pay anything, but they have to pay 1 rice per occupied palace, and for each rice they cannot pay, one of those palaces that they couldn't pay for has to lose a guy. So if they had 5 palaces and only paid 2, they'd have to lose 1 guy from each of 3 of those different palaces. You don't get total selection in this event. And that's the only event where you don't get total selection who you have to remove. It has to be 1 from each non-fed palace. Next is the Imperial Tribute, and players have to pay 4 money. For each money less than 4 they pay, they lose a guy. They can lose guys from anywhere. It's totally up to them. Drought's the only one where you don't have full flexibility on who you lose. And you must pay money. So if you have 3 money, for instance, you have to pay all 3 and lose 1. You can't hold it back, or only pay 2. Next is the Mongol Invasion, and players score as many points as helmets they have in their area on their guys. The player with the least helmets loses 1 person of their choice from their area. If all players have the same number of helmets, everybody's going to lose 1. So that's bad news bears. And next is the fireworks display. Whoever has the most fireworks gets 6 points. Whoever has the second most gets 3 points. And then whoever scored points has to discard half of their fireworks, round it up, back to the general supply. If there's a tie, all the tied players get the full points. So if one guy has 10 and then 2 guys have 8, both of those guys with 8 would get the 3 points. The exception to that is if you have 0 fireworks, no matter how many anybody else has, you cannot score points with 0 fireworks. And last is Contagion. Everybody actually has to release 3 people, -1 for each mortar they have in their area. After the event, scoring takes place, and this happens every round. First, any uninhabited palaces lose a floor. So if this person had this palace here that was too high, but no people in it, then he would lose the top. But he still has the palace here, good for him. Each palace is worth 1 point, so this player here will get 1, 2, 3 points for palaces. And each dragon is also worth 1 point. So your small privilege is 1 point per round, your large privilege is 2 points per round, and each fan is worth 1 point. The game proceeds like this until the 12th round. At the end of the 12th round, normal scoring takes place, but then a final scoring also takes place. Each person left in your palaces is worth 2 points each, and you multiply the number of Buddhas by the height of their palace. So this guy has 1 Buddha on him. If he's in a palace 2 high, like right here, he would be 1 times 2. If he was in a palace 3 high, he'd be worth 3 points. And then each player sells back all of their rice and fireworks for 2 money each, and then everybody gets 1 point for every 3 money they have. Player with the most points wins. Let's get going with our example playthrough. So we start with the initial staffing phase that takes place before the game only. And the red player is on top of the turn order track. So he's going to take a Buddha and put him in this area, and a warrior and put him over here. So the warrior is 5 and the Buddha is 6. So he goes up 11 spaces on the turn order track. Next is the blue guy over here. He's going to take a fireworks and a Buddha. Remember, he could not take the warrior
and the Buddha because they were already selected by this player. And he's also going to put one of them in each place, but he goes right on top of the other guy in turn order. This player over here is going to take a little bit different route. He's going to take a builder and a taxman for 5 turn order points. Okay, so now we begin with the actual round. So we flip up these action cards here. And remember, there's 3 groups because there's 3 players. If there was more players, there would be more groups. If there's less players, there'd be less groups. So blue is actually first this time, so he's going to go take his marker and put it on the place he'd like to do. He's going to put it here, and he's going to spend all 6 money on a large privilege. So he takes the large privilege and he puts it in his area, and now he has it for the rest of the game. And now red gets to go, and he'd like to go in the same place, but in order to do so, it would cost him 3 money. So he decides not to do that, and instead he decides to go over here, where he's going to build. Because he has no hammers in his personal area, and there's only 1 hammer on this card, he gets to build a palace 1 tall. So he puts that palace in his area, and his turn is over. Last, yellow gets to go, and unfortunately both of the spaces he wanted have already been taken. So he's going to go here and pay 3 money, but he's going to take that building space as well. It's totally okay to pick something that's already taken by somebody else, but he does have a builder in his area, and along with that, so he gets to build 2 palaces. He's going to use them to build a palace, a new palace 2 stories high. Now that each player has taken their action, we move on to the person phase. Blue is still first in turn order, so blue's going to get to select a person first. Blue plays his Buddha guy card, and he takes this Buddha worth 6, sticking him over here. So he moves up 6 spaces in turn order, and now red gets to go. Red also decides he wants the Buddha, so he's going to discard the Buddha and take... He could take either the elder or the younger Buddha, but he wants the younger Buddha as well, and he puts him in his new palace because he doesn't want it to decay later in the turn. So he moves up 6 for doing so. And he lands on top of blue, so he's going to get to go first next turn. As usual, yellow's taken another route, so he's going to lay out his farmer, and he's going to take the elder farmer, only moving up 1 space in turn order, but putting him in this palace as well. So now that everyone's taken a person, the event happens, but the first event of the game is nothing, so nothing actually happens. And then we go into scoring round. First, we check for any uninhabited palaces to lose a layer. Everybody's palaces have at least 1 guy in them, so they're okay. And then we score points. So this player up here gets 3 points, 1 for each palace. Then this guy over here gets 3 points, 1 for each palace. And lastly, blue only has 2 palaces, but he has a large privilege worth 2 additional points. So at this point, the players are going to take back their player markers. These are going to get shuffled up into different groups, and we'll continue the game. Now we go to scoring. Over here, yellow has a palace with nobody in it, so it actually decays a level, but it's okay because it still exists. So he gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points for palaces, and 2 more points because he has these court ladies, so that's 11 points. Now red gets 1, 2, 3, 4 points for palaces. Red also has a court lady for 1 point and a large privilege for 2 more points. And blue gets 1, 2, 3 points, 4 for his court lady, and 2 more for his large privilege, so that's 6. Now, because it's the end of the game, we go through a final scoring, and each player gets 2 points per guy left in their area, so that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 for red, 2, 4, 6, 8 for blue, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 for yellow. Now we score Buddhas. Yellow has a 2-person Buddha in a palace of 3 and another 2-person Buddha in a palace of 3, so that's 6, 12 points for Buddhas. Neither red nor blue have Buddhas, so they get no points there. Also, players convert their resources into money, so each firework and each rice is worth 2 money. So these players take their money. Then every 3 money is 1 point, so yellow gets 1 point. Unfortunately for red and blue, they only have 2 money, so no points for them. Yellow is the big winner.
In the Year of the Dragon has a reputation of being a really mean game, and that's because some of the things you build over the course of the game are absolutely going to be destroyed. It's inevitable, and certain players cannot stand that. That being said, I really enjoy it, and managing the inflow and outflow of those persons is really the crux of the game. The interesting thing here is those persons are really your most critical resource, and managing them effectively makes for a very strategic and fulfilling experience. You have to be careful, however, when introducing this game to new players. As much as I like it, I still have to hesitate because if a player doesn't understand what they're doing, the game is really punishing. It's totally possible for a player to lose absolutely everything after a few events that they didn't properly prepare for. So just make sure you do a few example turns or really describe the rules well. There's also an online implementation of this on Board Game Arena, so if it's one that looks interesting to you, I always suggest you check it out there first just to get an idea of how it plays. But as you get players that know what they're doing, it tends to make a very fun, stressful but tight experience. And I recommend it with more players. I'm not a big fan of it with 2 just because I feel like turn order is a little bit overpowered. But with the full complement or 3+, it makes for a very strategic, fun game. So that's In the Year of the Dragon.